Stan Hansen wasn't just stiff. He was legally blind and threw lariats like he was aiming for ghosts. The man worked like he was fighting for his life in a rodeo. Except his opponents weren't cows, they were pay-per-view attractions, trying to leave the ring with their bones intact. Hansen didn't go hard, he obliterated. And if you were unlucky enough to get booked against him, you weren't thinking about ring psychology, you were thinking about dental coverage. This video isn't about respect, it's about fear. Real fear. The kind that crept in when the agent said, "You're working Stan tonight," and your spine quietly whispered, "We're not gonna make it." Knees locked. Sweat started early. You began wondering if your insurance covered decapitation. These aren't stories told to build a myth. They're pulled from actual shoot interviews, podcasts, and eyewitness memories of guys who lived to limp away from the Hansen experience. So light a candle for the unlucky souls. Here are the wrestlers who genuinely dreaded stepping into a ring with Stan Hansen. No kayfabe, just stiff shots and broken orbital bones. Let's get into it. Lex Luger had the look of a Greek god and the spine of a high school theater kid. You can't flex your way out of a Stan Hansen match. Lex tried, and it nearly killed him. In late 1990, Luger was the reigning US champion in the WCW management, decided to give him a shot of real credibility by throwing him in the ring with Hansen, who'd just roared in from Japan looking to eat somebody's liver. In their Halloween Havoc match, Hansen legit brutalized Lex, clobbered him in the jaw, snapped him around like a gym towel, and pinned him clean. And it wasn't just the result that hurt. Luger was so shook from Stan's stiffness that he actually started refusing rematches, openly telling people he did not want to work with Hansen again. According to multiple shoot accounts, Luger would avoid eye contact and try to get out of programs. Rare honesty from a man built like a tank, but wired like an air fryer. Stan didn't care. Hansen didn't respect Luger. "All show, no go," Stan reportedly said about the guy. And from a man who dropped Bruno Sammartino on his neck by accident and still got invited back, that's cold. Lex Luger feared Stan Hansen because Stan represented everything he wasn't. A real dangerous man who didn't care if your tan rubbed off on his elbow pad. Vader was a 400-pound freight train with fists like cinder blocks. And even he didn't want that Stan smoke. Vader was used to being the bully. He stiffed guys for fun, clubbed rookies just to see if they'd cry, and laid into veterans like they were punch bags that owed him money. But when Stan Hansen entered the ring, Vader found out what it felt like to be the smaller dog. Vader later admitted in interviews that he had a real fear of Stan. Not just because of his hits, but because Hansen didn't give a single care about your main event status or how much you weighed. Stan treated everyone like a potato sack, except he hit the potatoes. Behind the scenes, Vader knew he was in over his head. For the first time, the monster wasn't the biggest problem in the ring, he was the target. Stan had a reputation in Japan for not caring about finishers, egos, or bones, and Vader was the one who paid the price. That match made Vader a legend, but it also made him cautious. When Stan was booked, Vader flinched. Because Stan didn't work, he wrecked. If you're still here and your eyeball hasn't popped out yet, hit that like button before Stan lariats your browser. Subscribe for more real shoot chaos, not the sugar-coated fake respect stuff. We only cover the legit psychos. No kayfabe, no soft punches, just full contact truth. Now back to the pain. If Stan Hansen was a windstorm with a cowboy hat, then Vader was the earthquake underneath. Seismic, suffocating, and unapologetically stiff. But there's one moment that lives in infamy, a clip so violent it looks like horrorcore wrestling. The 1990 match where Stan Hansen popped Vader's eye clean out of its socket. And Vader didn't even blink, mostly because he physically couldn't. It happened in Tokyo Dome, a match between two tanks. Vader was on the receiving end of one of Stan's legendary lariats, the kind of clothesline that requires dental records for ID. And as Vader's head snapped back, his eye dislodged, tearing the orbital bone with it. Did Vader crawl out of the ring and call it a night? No. He popped that eyeball back in with his bare hand and kept going. He stuffed it back in like a kid cheating at Operation. You could hear the crowd not gasp, because Japanese fans don't gasp. They respectfully absorb trauma. Meanwhile, Vader, looking like the Terminator after a bar fight, just kept slugging forward like the fight hadn't skipped a beat. This wasn't just the scariest moment of his career. This was the moment everyone realized Vader might not be human. No normal man gets his eye knocked loose and responds by working stiffer. Most wrestlers would call a medic. Vader called the next spot. Because when your eye gets punched halfway across Tokyo and you're still vertical, you don't ask questions. You keep throwing bodies. This wasn't valor. It was chemical imbalance in a 400-pound juggernaut who didn't understand the concept of self-preservation. The man had his eye hanging out of his head like a deleted Mortal Kombat fatality. And what did he do? He shoved it back in with his thumb like he was resetting a game cartridge. No mask, no gimmick, just raw flesh and unprocessed rage. It wasn't a comeback. It was a horror movie that kept filming after the credits rolled. And Stan? Hansen looked at Vader's face like it was in his way. No pause, no panic, no, "Hey brother, are you okay?" Just another lariat that nearly sent Vader's retinas into the mezzanine. Hansen didn't hit hard. He hit like he was mad at your ancestors. There was no powerbomb. There didn't need to be. Vader kept going on pure ego and head trauma. The match was stiff as a coffin lid. The eye stayed in, barely, but Vader's spot, as the scariest man in wrestling, cemented in blood. The eye didn't fully heal right. He wore a mask for years, not just for show, but to keep that thing from bouncing out during high spots. But Vader didn't complain. He called Stan Hansen one of the toughest SOBs alive, and meant it. And Stan? He barely flinched. Probably thought Vader's eye was in the way of his elbow. This match wasn't about a winner. It was about survival. It wasn't wrestling. It was flesh-based demolition derby, the kind of match you don't watch twice, because the first time already took a year off your life. One guy walked out looking like a horror movie. The other guy was just being Stan. You wanted to shoot violence? That's it. An eyeball on the canvas. And two men too tough to stop swinging. You'd think after Vader's eye made a break for freedom, and Hansen stiffed him like rent was due, that would have been the end of the feud. But nope. They did it again. Because in pure Resu, if you don't nearly die, the match didn't count. After the Tokyo Dome, Vader's legend skyrocketed. Not because he beat Hansen, he didn't, but because he finished the match with a dislocated eye and a chip on his shoulder the size of a sumo ring. Doctors told him to take time off. Instead, Vader booked himself more matches with Hansen. That's not bravery, that's unlicensed mental instability. They met again in July 1990, and while no eyes popped out this time, the violence didn't tone down. It just got more methodical. The strikes were still potato grade. The selling was mostly real. And the crowd? They weren't cheering. They were bracing. These weren't matches. They were receipts. Even years later, Vader called Stan Hansen the stiffest guy he ever worked. And this is from a man who broke Joe Thurman's back and knocked out Inoki's front row. Hansen, on the other hand, never changed. He never apologized. He didn't need to. The man was a 300-pound consequence with a lariat. The aftermath wasn't reconciliation. It was escalation. Because only two men who had both tasted their own blood could build that kind of twisted respect. This wasn't just wrestling. It was a war zone with a one-man wrecking crew swinging blind and hitting hard. When the booking sheet flashed his name, men didn't rehearse promos. They updated their wills. Respect might have been given, but fear? That was the real currency in this brutal economy. So, next time you see that name on the schedule, don't get hyped, get scared. Because this was no fairy tale. It was the harsh truth of wrestling's Wild West, where the biggest lariat wins and respect is just a bonus you pray for. Hit like if you want more raw, no-fluff wrestling truths, and subscribe if you can handle the real backstage heat. This isn't entertainment, it's survival.